So, starting surgery on the 1981 Wanderlodge and pulling the 3208 NA cat out and replacing it with ISM Cummins. So there's my new motor. It's not new. It's got about 400,000 kilometers on an in-frame, and I took it completely apart, cleaned it, resealed everything, front and rear mains, new turbo, new injectors, new belts and whatnot, and reset the valves and jakes. And it already had a rebuilt transmission and a new clutch as well, so that was convenient. So I took that apart to verify that had been done. So this should effectively be a new engine. I dropped the pan and looked at the bearings, and they're within new tolerance, so they're basically brand new, and the inside of the motor just looks fresh. And in the interest of getting the air conditioning going again, which has never worked since I've had this motor home, I put a new compressor on. And so there's a few things that I want to fix with this repower. So I might as well start here. Everything is run off gears on this new motor. So the only belt really that you need to drive it is the alternator belt. So there's a serpentine belt, and it's got a spring-loaded tensioner, and that's it. On the other side there is a belt for the AC, but the AC is not really, required for operation. But it's also got a spring-loaded tensioner. And there's nothing else to really look at or adjust here. The fan is air operated, and there's nothing else to look at behind the fan. Just those two belts. That's it. And this engine has jakes, proper engine brake. It's got 425 horse and 1,550 feet of torque. It's the newest. It's not the newest. It's the last generation of electronically controlled diesel engines without emissions. So this is a 2000 model. So I get the benefits of electronic unit injection and high pressure injection without any, EGR, catalytic converter, or any of that other stuff that causes trouble. So there's the power steering pump, gear driven. The air compressor, which I rebuilt, is gear driven. And the unit injector, the high pressure injection pump, is gear driven off the back of the compressor. And then on the other side, the water pump is also gear driven. So now, come and have a look at the old cat. And I've got the radiator out already, but this is how this one runs. Belt driven compressor. Belt-driven water pump, belt-driven alternator, belt-driven AC compressor, and belt-driven power steering pump. And the trouble with that, of course, is you can't get at any of these belts. They all have to be mechanically adjusted. The fan hub slides up and down. The fan is a facet. So some kind of a electromagnet in there. So there's electronics involved. See all the wires back there? And each one, so there's belt for the power steering, belt for the water pump, belt for the compressor, and belt for the AC, or belt for the compressor and the alternator, and then one for the AC if it was running, but it's never run on this bus. So the trouble with that is they've all got to be adjusted, and you can't get in here to adjust them. So someone at some point put a hinge on the radiator, so you unbolt the bumper, pull the grill off, and you swing the radiator out, and it swings out to about there. And then you can get in there and mess around, and it is a nightmare, which is why there's a leak, because I've never had any interest in fixing that compressor leak, because it's such a pain in the butt to get in there. So that's one of the things I want to fix. I don't want to swing this radiator anymore. I want something that's maintenance-free on the front end. That's one of the things. The other thing is to go way quicker. This one, the old 3208, 210 horsepower, naturally aspirated, no turbo. And I live in British Columbia. Everywhere is an 8% grade. And you get to the top, and then you got to creep down the other side because it's a 4-speed automatic transmission with no auxiliary braking at all. So you creep down the other side as slow as you went up the front side. And so with this new motor, I've got I've got twice the horsepower, 3 times the torque. I've got a 13-speed manual transmission with an overdrive instead of a 4-speed direct drive automatic slush box. And I've got a proper Jacob's engine brake, so I can go down the backside as fast as I come up the front side. And one of the other things that's always bothered me about this is wiring. So Bluebird took an old school bus, and then they build the basic school bus, and then they run it to another factory and they modify it into an RV. And early on, when this one was built, they were just basically splicing into the old school bus wiring system as far as I could see. So when I first started digging into this and I saw all these butt connectors, I assumed that someone had been in here messing around. Like, look at that. All taped together butt connectors. But as it turns out, that's just how Bluebird did it. And I get a lot of these. Like, that's not me or anyone else, that's just Bluebird. They just, you know, they had extra wires and they just kind of hung there. And there's a bunch of them up under the dash. So that bothered me as well. I wanted to fix that. So I've got the entire wiring harness off the Freightliner that I stole the motor from. And all that's going back in. I'm ripping all the Bluebird wiring out and putting the Freightliner wiring harness in, complete with all the factory connections and the factory fuse panel. And this one actually it's got this bus bar here with the breakers, circuit breakers. It's got one little guy. Another little fuse panel in the battery box there. And it's got one up overhead, another one up there, and there's one in underneath the sofa. They just jammed them wherever. So there's one behind the driver's seat in the sofa, under the sofa. One other thing. The dash heat has never worked well. We've never had dash air conditioning. The dash heat is very hit and miss. They run. They have these 12-volt solenoids here and there, and valves that you have to turn on and off to get the heat going. And they're problematic. It's just too complicated. So I want to simplify it and put a proper automotive-style heating and cooling system in. And when I come inside the bus, one of the other things I want to deal with is the dash. So this is the old Bluebird dash. This is what we got. And again, I think what happened was it was a school bus dash, and they started grafting things in when they turned it into a motorhome. So they just kept on tacking things on to the old school bus until they had a motorhome. So here's my headlight switch up here. And here's the dash lighting switch down here. It's on the other side of the dash. And then I always got to look for the marker lights. Now here's the marker lights, and here's the driving lights. So there's 4 switches to turn the lights on, and they're all randomly scattered across the dash. And the rest of the switchgear is kind of similar. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't like that. And if I pulled this dash apart, it's just another maze of butt connectors and tangle of wires. So I want to build a new dash. I'm going to use the electronic dash gauge cluster from the Freightliner. I'm going to replace all this. I'm going to keep the Wanderlodge RV gauges and replace most of these with Freightliner gauges. And the other thing that I want to fix, or one of the other things, is this doghouse. So this is the motor doghouse. In order to check the oil and whatnot, you got to lift it up, and there's your motor. It's kind of dark in my shop, so it's hard to see, but you can see it's well and truly jammed in there. And it sticks up, and you've got to slide your way by it to get into the front seats. Not a lot of room there. The seats are actually, there's a slider, so there's an air slide on the back of the seat, and you can push the seat over to the wall, get in, and then you push it back to center yourself with the steering wheel. And the passenger side is the same. And usually whoever sits here, they just usually climb over the doghouse and sit there. So I would like to make this doghouse smaller, which is a tall order because the motor I'm putting in is much bigger. But I think if I wiggle things around a bit, I can rebuild this doghouse to make it much smaller and easier to climb in and out of the driver and passenger seats. And the other thing that I want to fix is you can see that I'm looking at the pedals, and behind the pedals there's daylight, because I'm going to go outside again. This bus has no firewall. It's never had a firewall. So we've taken the fronts off, but there's just these thin sheet metal covers. You can see there's no sealing or gasketing there. And when you swing them open, there's your driver's feet. And so it's not really insulated or sealed. So driving in the winter, you get a lot of drafts, you get a lot of road noise, and there's really no way to seal that up. So I want to put the Freightliner firewall in there with the Freightliner pedal assembly, so that everything is properly sealed with a thick layer of steel between my feet and the motor and the road. So there's probably a few other things I'm going to fix along the way, but that's kind of the gist of it. So I'm halfway through this project. I bought a Freightliner truck, completely dismantled it, pulled the motor and transmission out, refreshed the motor and transmission, and built a little dolly for it so it's ready to slide back in. And today I'm going to pull the motor and transmission.